Hi guys, so I just wanted to go through with our resin kits with you tonight. It's not complicated, it's actually quite simple, but it does have to be very precise. So I just wanted to make a wee video to run through a few things with you. You may have done the workshop, you may be about to do the workshop. So this is handy for either. And it's a good wee reference to come back to. So in your kits you may have, there's a few different kits, so there will be the pendants. There's also kits with little bezels to make some jewellery. These also make little pendants too, but this is more of a mould. So I'll go through all of these with you and colouring it. So in your kit you'll get some embellishments, some dried flowers, some cogs, some bits and pieces. You can basically use anything in this yourself. I have put in my resin anything from stones to gems to dog hair and human hair. So you can basically put anything in your resin, anything that's personal to you, anything you find that looks a bit interesting that you want to stick into it. There's a few people I know would use, they would find dead insects and put it in it. Not for me, but if it's for you, go ahead. And it actually looks quite nice. So I'm going to go through this with you. The resin we use is a 1-to-1 resin, which means it's half resin, half hardener. And we need both of these in an equal amount to make them work, otherwise it'll be quite tacky. A lot of other resins that are on the market would be a 2-to-1. They're a wee bit more complicated to mix and there's more scope for getting it wrong. So the 1-to-1 is foolproof as long as you get it right. So I am going to mix my resin. So I want to put these little cups that you get with it, or go up in 5, 10, 15 all the way up to 30. I always start with the smallest amount, because especially at the beginning you don't want to make all your resin. So, and you need very little amounts, to be honest, to do the pendants. So I always tend to make tinier amounts, and you can top it up rather than using lots and lots of resin and not being prepared, not having anything to do with it. And it basically, you have a 30-minute window with it where it gets hard and you can't use it anymore, so it just basically dries in the cup. So that's a bit of a waste. So I would use little amounts. I'm maybe not even going to use 5 mils to do this, but so this will be then 2.5 of each, and you will have a little dropper, which I have about somewhere, and I think, yes, I've moved. So you can use a little dropper, and I'm not going to use this, so just for it's a wee bit slower to fill, so I'm just going to go ahead and pour it in. So I want about 2.5 in here, and let it settle a little bit. So I'm kind of, sorry, just looking at it. So you want to get in the camera here, so looking at it, yeah. That's about 2.5, and then so that's our hardener, and then we want to put an equal amount of our resin in to bring us up to 5. So with the dropper you can be a little bit more precise, but it does take a little bit longer. Yeah, that's bringing us up to 5. So this has to be quite precise, so it has to be if it's 2.5 mils, it has to be 2.5 mils of hardener, 2.5 mils of resin. Same equal amounts in whatever you use. It also has to be stirred for 3 minutes, and I'm going to set a timer on my phone actually. Bear with me 1 second. So it's crucial that it's mixed for 3 minutes. Siri, start a timer for 3 minutes. It's not going to play with me. Siri, start a timer for 3 minutes.
Your timer is set for 3 minutes.
Thank you. So when we start mixing, you'll see that I'm mixing this quite slowly. And because it is crystal clear, you can see if there's any bubbles starting to form in it. So we want to stir it quite slowly. Okay, and if you stir, the faster you stir this, the more bubbles you will get. And I have seen people just literally much, and it is just cloudy with bubbles. So we don't want bubbles. Sometimes it can have quite a nice effect in it. If we do get bubbles, there's a few ways we can get rid of them. So you can use a heat gun. So heat basically gets rid of the bubbles. So you can use a heat gun if it's kind of a wee bit further back, because if you put it too close, then it's going to move all the resin. So you want to actually get the bubbles out of it when it's in your bezel or in your mould. You can also use like a lighter or a naked flame. So if you have like a big long lighter, and just kind of run it over the top, and this just pops all the bubbles. This brings all the air up to the top and it pops up. Or you could use like a little cocktail stick if there's not that many, and sometimes the bubbles are a little bit bigger, and you just pop the bubble. But I find stirring it slowly, and I can see a few little bubbles here, but I'm not overly concerned about that because I can literally just go like that and pop them. So the bubbles that I would be most concerned about is the tiny little ones. Like I said, if you stir it really, really fast, it almost becomes cloudy. You get so many bubbles, so stir quite slowly. 3 minutes doesn't seem that long, but when you're stirring it, you want to get it right. So it's better to set a timer. So when this is done, I am going to pour a little bit into an open bezel, and I will show you how to do that. I'm also going to pour another little bit into a closed back bezel and put a colour into it, and if I have any left, I'm going to put another into a mould. And there's a few that I've done already. Now you can layer it up, so you could put your colour in it, you could put your embellishments, and then you could put a clear resin over it, but we can't do it all together. So we have about a 30-minute working time with the resin. So what that means is we can use it, after it's been stirred and after it's been mixed, we can use it for 30 minutes up to that. Otherwise it starts, you can see at the minute, it's quite liquidy, and that stops, and it just kind of starts to go hard. It goes kind of like toffee, you know, when you just make toffee and it's quite soft and you can stir it, and then it just kind of goes hard. So we want to work with it when it's nice and liquidy and nice and pliable. So to layer it up, if you're doing colours, thank you Siri. So to layer it up, if we're going to do colours, like I said, we have about a 30-minute working time. So even if you're putting embellishments on, you can put the embellishments straight in, or you can, here's one that I had done earlier. So I had put that in maybe about half an hour ago, and I'm not moving it too much because it's still, if I touched it, it would just stick to my finger, but it's not quite liquid at the minute. So what I can do with this, so I've put a little bit of colour in it, and I will tell you about colour in a minute, and I can then put some bits and pieces in it. So what am I going to use? That's like our little bag of embellishments, and I think I want to maybe put a few little gems. Oh, here's a nice little flower. So sometimes you might be better with a wee pair of tweezers. This, especially if you're working with resin, because everything sticks. Absolutely everything sticks. So this is a coloured resin, and I will show you how to make the coloured resin in a second, that I have put. So I'm going to start putting my embellishments on. Oh. And I will get a little pair of tweezers or a little cocktail stick. Don't worry if it goes like that, because you just kind of flip it over. And you can see this is actually quite good because it's showing you that this isn't really liquid anymore. It's almost like tar, and I'm going to use another because you can get this out. So it's quite tricky to get. Just going to go in and go for it. There we go. So I'm going to put this away over here. So you can see there that it's kind of starting to smooth out again. So it's not quite set, and it was quite wet. So I'm going to put like a little rainbow on here so I can't flip over. So I'm going to put a little rainbow, and perhaps let's see, let's get another little gem. a little heart and put a little heart on it. There we go. So because that is thick, not quite set, it's still quite runny, but I can move it about. Whereas if that was pure liquid, that would just sink down, that would just completely sink. So I'm going to put this over here and I'm going to show you how to colour. Now I would use to colour either mica powders, I've got my big bag of mica powders here, or alcohol inks. So mica powders are widely used in a lot of cosmetics. You can also use, acrylic, and I'll show you how to use that in a second too, so you can use acrylic paint. So mica powder is widely used in cosmetics, so you can either use a tiny little bit of your little shimmery mica powder and mix it in. I'm not going to do that because a lot of people would have it, but generally if you want to use stuff that's lying about your house, the best thing with mica powders in it is a makeup palette. Okay, so I am going to pour a little bit of this clear resin into a closed bezel. Just want a tiny bit. Then I want to take, so as you can see I've just got a little blob on it there, so I think I'm going to put a little bit of purple. So I'll just take a little cocktail stick and I just scrape gently. And this is a very non-expensive way. Mica powders, I think that bag of mica powder was maybe about £30. I've got all different colours in it. This does exactly the same job. So we put it in. You can put it into a little pot, or you can mix it anywhere really. Don't mix it in your clear resin that you have, because it obviously colours all of your resin. So you want to, I just generally tend to mix it in the bezel because there's less mess then. I'm going to put a little bit more resin in. You can see the lovely effect it has while this spreads. It's quite pretty. And this is an Urban Decay palette, but I'm sure you could use absolutely anything. And the Urban Decay has a bit of a shimmer to it. So when this dries, it will be quite sparkly. So you can really use any colour. So you just want to use a little stick. Just to get around all the edges. I'm going to put a little bit more because you can still see through to the base at the minute. So just use the other side of your stick that doesn't have resin on it, because you don't want to get resin on your makeup palette. I'm just going to scratch a little more in. Again, you can just go over this with your wee makeup brush and smooth that out again. So we want to mix that in. But this gives a fantastic base, especially for the closed bezels. If you're putting flowers or whatever in, it just makes a lovely effect in the back of it. So you can go through, just make sure it gets all out to the edge. You can just do patterns on it, and it's going to smooth out anyway, but you can see you now have, sorry, just had that off camera there. So this is now a lovely shimmery purple colour. So we want to leave that to dry. I'm going to put some bits and pieces on that, but I'm going to leave it for about an hour or two, and then I'm going to put maybe some flowers on top of it, and then I'm going to pour some clear resin onto it, and then I'm going to let it sit just here because just at the edge. So we want, after we've completed our pendant, we want to cure it for about 24 hours. So we want to put it somewhere on a flat surface. We want to put it somewhere cool. We want to put it somewhere dust free. So even if you have to put something over it, like a little bowl or whatever, and make sure you keep it probably in the coolest place in your house, not the fridge, somewhere cooler. So I think the fridge would have just a wee bit too much water and condensation in it. So if you actually put it somewhere quite cool, weather's not fantastic at the minute, but it's still quite warm, so it might take it a while if it's sitting at room temperature, just a little bit longer. Do not touch it for 24 hours, because even if you touch it and it's going hard, then you'll actually get fingerprints in it, so we don't want to touch it, don't want to touch it at all. Okay, so for our next one, we're going to do an open back bezel. So you can see this one is open, and how we do this is we get a little bit of sellotape, and if you've got some open back bezels in the kit, it will probably have some sellotape on it anyway for you, just in case you're wondering why it was there. So we just want to completely cover the back, make sure it's quite smooth, and then just flip it over and just make sure it's pushed down. Now with open back bezels, you can do the colour, so you can put a colour into it, but I think it's quite nice because you can totally see through it. It's sometimes nice just to use clear resin on it and maybe put some flowers or some other embellishments on it. Just be careful with the sticky tape because it is very sticky. You know, you can maybe do this, try to dull the stickiness down a little bit. Sometimes after you've done it, it can be quite problematic if it sticks to everything. One time I was doing it, and I had a leather swivel chair, and I had turned it around, went to do something, and I come back and the bezel was gone. So didn't know where it was, and it had actually stuck to the back of the chair, and it was dripping all the way down the chair. So just be careful of the sellotape, because it does tend to stick everywhere. So we want to pour some clear stuff into this, and again, it depends, you can layer it up. So you've maybe seen resin and it looks like it's kind of just sitting in the middle of it, so to do that it would just be like we've done the coloured one. So we leave it for about a half an hour to settle, and when it starts to get a little bit harder, because we don't want to put our embellishments on and then it to sink the whole way down. And then I'm going to use, where's my little stick again? So just use the edge of the stick just to push this the whole way down, just to make sure all of it is covered. So just spreading it out and make sure it's coming up to the edges. And it shouldn't leak out at all, because the sellotape should be holding it down, so that should be quite secure. So it doesn't have to be too neat, because this will self-level out, but just make sure that everywhere is covered. Okay, so for this one I should maybe be using tweezers. So I'm going to put a few little flowers, pop those on. And I think I put a few, like I said, you can use absolutely anything in this. So that's that little bow. I think I'm going to put that down, hopefully it turns round. Again, you can just move it over with these. You can use dried flowers. If you're using flowers, just make sure that you don't have to use a proper flower press for them, but just make sure that they have been pressed down flat, preferably for a few days before you put them in your resin, because that'll draw out all the moisture. If you put in this size, it shouldn't matter so much, but if you're doing bigger flowers, make sure a lot of the moisture's out, because when you put it in and you mix it with the resin, then the resin will draw the water out, so you kind of will find little bubbles around it and it will go quite cloudy. So you want as much of the water out of it as possible, which is why we want it dried. Okay, so that's that one. So I'm going to basically just top this up. So this will shift about and we can move it, and you'll see the flowers moving. So you can just bring those back in again. And we want to kind of tuck them because they will have a tendency to float to the top, so we kind of just want to tuck them under the resin, make sure they're all covered, because otherwise whenever it dries you'll have bits of the flower sticking up. And we just want to bring it up level, just want to put the resin up level to the top. And you don't want to put too much in. You can put just enough to give it an almost domed effect, but you don't want to put too much in for it to spill over, and you don't want to put too little for it to be inverted. So just keep a wee eye on how much you're putting in. So I think that's round about that. So I'm going to move this out of the way. Actually, I'm going to move these flowers over just before the resin sets. So I'm going to move this over here a little bit. I think I'm going to put this last one in too. So a little purple flower here, and just bring this up here a little bit. I just want to tuck that under. Just give it a few wee taps, make sure it's submerged, that there's no bits sticking up. Sometimes at this stage it's quite hard to see it, but I think that is it finished. So I'm going to move this to the side. So we have our purple one that should be ready in about a half an hour for us to put some embellishments on it, and then put some more resin over the top. And again, I have another one that I had made earlier. So again, this was another one that I had made with eyeshadow. So I've done like a blue, it was the Urban Decay palette again. And I had also done one at the same time, same colour, in the mould. So I've just put it in and just made sure everything was covered up there. So you just go in with your little stick and make sure everywhere around the little hole is going to be covered. So we leave all of these in a cool, dust-free place for 24 hours. So I have one here that I had made and should be ready. So this has been slightly more than 24 hours. Just move these out of the way. So I just want to peel this back. And this was one that I had made with a little charm. So if you have any charms, any broken jewellery that you can use, I had put a colour on the back. So I had used one of the mica powders just to do a thin layer in the back. I had used some of my dog's hair, which is just lying below me there, so trimmed it off, put a few wee bits in, and then I put a little paw charm and a flower over it, and this has actually settled quite well, and I put some clear resin over the top. So this should peel off. Yeah, so if this wasn't ready, you would actually see the resin still sticking to the tape. So this is dried completely. It's a nice marbly effect. So there's still a little bit of the residue from the sellotape there, so you can just take that off with some soap and water, it'll wash off, but this is actually quite hard now. It's not feeling tacky at all, so this is cured quite well. So this is ready to either go onto a key ring or onto a necklace. Well guys, I hope you find this useful, and if you have any questions or any queries, you can get me at robinshobbycafe.com. Thanks very much. Have a good evening.